Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, AMU Aligarh. Today I'm going to talk about the minimal state, and in minimal state, the liberal state, how it came about and how it came to have a minimal kind of an outlook, or how he prescribed minimal activities for the state. In my previous video, I have already talked about the minimal negative, that is a classical liberal theory of state itself. So today we are going to talk about more than negative, how again the minimal state is perceived in later half of 19th and 20th century. So the laissez-faire theory or minimal state arose as a natural reaction to mischievous and meddlesome interference with which characterized the relation of the state to the individual prior to 18th century. Now, there was also undue restriction on the freedom of trade. With the coming of Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, there was bound to be a reaction against all these forms of state action. Now, there were new inventions which revolutionized the economic life of the people. Goods were being produced on a gigantic scale, and new markets were being won where these goods could be sold. Now, in these circumstances, it was natural for men of industry, enterprise, and originality to claim the right to be left alone as far as possible so that they could utilize their powers to the maximum advantage. So let things alone because the world is self-regulating. Now, that was the slogan of 18th century liberal outlook. Now, in the light of this background, it is not surprising to find that the minimal state, the concept, was considered a state as an evil, and it was necessitated by selfishness and rapacity of man, and it is a concession to human weakness. So the minimal outlook of state assumed that that for the restraining power of the state there will be no social peace and order. That is, the state has to be there. Unless it is there, there won't be any peace or any order, and the state should therefore give its undivided attention and its thought to the protection of individual in the society, but the promotion of the welfare falls outside its scope. So its main business is suppression of violence and fraud, and the guiding principle of that time, the minimal state, is and was a maximum possible individual freedom and minimum possible state action. Now, in the words of G.S. Mill, one of the proponent of this outlook of minimal state, he said, over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. So individualists are not at all agreed with what constituted the legitimate function of the state as a result of the positive state, the concept which had come in as a response to the concept of a negative state in the 19th century, later of 18th and 19th century. Now, extreme individualists such as Spencer, he limited the sphere of state action to a protection of individual against external enemies and the protection of individual against internal enemies and the enforcement of contracts lawfully made. So at that time, the minimal state supporters, they wanted a moderate type of activity on the part of state, not a maximum or welfare kind of an state activity. Now, in this, they had number of justifications for restricting the state and making it a minimal. So they had ethical justification here, and it was admitted that freedom of action is essential to the development of character, and without such freedom, individual becomes a mere automation. Now, that gives no joy to the individual. So joy comes only when life is free and individual have that freedom to mold their life as per their own ideals. So the highest development of individual is possible only when there is opportunity for self-reliance. And when the individual is thrown back to his own resources, and that gives a powerful incentive in the form of exercising his own enterprise, his originality, and his initiative. So if he possesses any intrinsic worth, he has an opportunity to manifest that in the light of the freedom that individual gets. So government action is legitimate up to a certain point, but beyond that, it cramps the individual freedom and his liberty to bring out his imagination into practice. So over government kills his sense of initiative and substitutes reliance on government for self-reliance. So it creates a pauper mentality, for the individual is tempted to be lazy and indolent and expect others to do for him what he should do for himself. So he receives no stimulus for the development of his talent, and the consequence is that both individual and society are losers. Now, further, the minimal statist, they had economic justification as well, and from the point of view of economic, they said life of man, as they believe that every man is self-seeking and that he knows his interest best. Therefore, the argument is that if a person is left to himself, he will make the best use of his opportunities, benefiting himself directly and society indirectly. Thus, if the capitalist is left alone, he will look around to see where he can invest his capital to the best advantage. Likewise, the laborer will look around to see where he can get the most advantageous terms for his services and offer his services there. Now, free competition and unrestricted operation of the law of supply and demand are thus in the economic interest of society. So, prices, wages, rent, and interest should all be unfettered so that they can adjust themselves to the prevailing economic conditions. Similarly, foreign trade should be left free. Artificial aids such as high tariffs and bounties to infant industries or any kind of hedging should be discouraged. Now, beyond providing that the market is kept free and open, and that fraud and treachery should not be practiced, and on another hand, the members of the society, the state has little to do in economic field. Further on, they provide the scientific arguments for having a minimal state, saying like when individual is in accordance with the biological law of the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. Now, Herbert Spencer, who is the chief exponent of this argument, he holds that the law of virtue by which life has evolved in the case of lower animals and subhuman species is his law of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. And he further argues that the same law should be allowed to operate in case of man too. If we are to evolve a race of strong, able and virile human beings, the natural course of progress means that the poor, the weak and the inefficient must go to the wall. So, although such a course means injustice for such individuals, the interest of society demands it. So, to these theoretical arguments, certain practical reasons are added by the adherents of this outlook. Then they also promoted or supported the minimal state on the basis of some practical reasons, and they argued that when the government attempts to do many things, it does them badly. It means red tape and routine, resulting in unnecessary delay and much wastage. So a great deal of necessary work is left undone when the government is doing it, and experience shows that government interference produces bad results in many cases. So as contested with private management and as contrasted with them, we find that the government management produces numerous failures. It lays the door open for robbery and corruption. So besides, the administration of law is not seldom irksome to the people, either on account of their natural aversion to man, to official interference, or account of nature of the law. Now, the liberal notion of minimal state that we are talking about is based on liberal notion of man, which gives due importance to man as a free agent in this world, having a free will of his own. And the origin of the state is it gives due role to individuals, their nature, their activities, interest and objectives. So the state is seen here as a necessity, an institution, evil or otherwise, which may establish law and order, peace and justice in society. So the state exists to serve the general interest of the society as a whole. Now it is regarded as an agency of human welfare, which will secure life and property of man. So state is regarded as a contributor to moral and social development of man. It protects rights and liberties, it resolves conflicts, brings consensus in otherwise conflict-ridden society, and it is the guardian of human and social welfare. So the role of the people and their will in the origin of the state is given importance by the liberals here, and the basis of state is not force but will of the people. So state is not a power but a social instrument to perform certain function. It is of the people by the people, for the people. So liberalism distinguishes between the state and society and maintains that state is for society and not otherwise. So the power of the state is assumed as limited and its sovereign as pluralistic. So state is not all comprehensive as its objectives and powers are limited. So classical liberalism supported minimal state with only negative police functions to perform. And here the nature of minimal state, here the liberals maintained that the state is merely an instrument of a class. It assumes that state has a potentiality to soften the conflicts to serve the interest of all classes. So the state can act as a shock absorber in the various conflicts of society, and there lies the fundamental difference between the liberals and the Marxian views with regard to the nature of state. So the nature of state, what is found to be is the state is a human institution created by man, and the end of the state, that is the purpose of the state, is to maintain law and order, discipline, peace, justice, and to serve the common interests of society. And rights, liberties, life and property of individual cannot be safe without the laws and sovereign power of the state. So state is made by the people and its basis is democratic. And there is a difference between state and society and state and government. And the sphere and sovereignty of the state is limited, and state creates unity in society and develops consensus. So it serves the interest of all the classes in society. And further, the minimal statists, they refuse to accept that state and sovereignty belong to any particular class, or it is an instrument of exploitation, and it does not give any right to revolution to any particular class. Now, this line of thinking sustained in 20th century as well, and in the later half of the 19th century. The negative liberalism, it changed into positive liberalism, and in the present century, that is change in the liberal view as was well accepted. However, some writers, they still supported the minimalist state, that is a negative state, and oppose the increasing intervention of the state in socio-economic and other spheres. Now, writers like Oakeshott, Nozick, Friedman, so they are the some who supported this minimalist state in 20th century, the later part of 20th century. Now these writers were traditional liberals and they are regarded as conservatives in the century. Now one of these writers, Nock, he maintains that the power of the state is not original, but it has been derived from the power of society. So he says that state is turning away contingency. In fact, he's turning every contingency that arises into a resource for accelerating the conversion of social power into state power. So that's the opportunity state seeks every time. But the social power which Nock is talking about is in fact the power of a class. And in a capitalist socio-economic and political order, this power lies with capitalists, and the social power is used by the state to safeguard the interest of this class. Now further on, we find in the views of Oakeshott, one of the powerful supporter of negative liberalism in the 20th century. He maintains that there is essential unity and harmony in society, and the influence of state should be bare minimum. So Oakeshott maintains that authority of the state should be limited, and every individual should have the maximum sphere of his own to act upon. And that is, he wrote in one of his essays, he rejected collectivism and maintains that it is the enemy of a free society. He further maintains that collectivism stands for managed society, and freedom can exist only in an unregulated competitive society, and the task of the state is establishment and maintenance of effective competition by means of an appropriate legal system. So that was the sphere of activity he emphasized, and he further believed that to safeguard the freedom of the individual, there should be effective, unregulated competition, and the state must not interfere in it. Government, Oakeshott repeatedly tells, is merely to pursue the peace in society. Now, it was considered a specific and limited activity, namely the provision and custody of a general rule of conduct. It seeks only to adjust the interest of its subjects. That is, the state should only try to balance the interest of the subjects. It has no other function to perform. Certainly, no social or political or economic function of any importance. Now, thus Oakeshott possesses and he opposes increase in the function of the state on the basis that it will lead to collectivism and it would be injurious to freedom of the individuals. However, the basic assumption of Oakeshott that there is necessary unity and harmony in society is incorrect, because we know that society is class driven and class struggle is fundamental, and in such a situation, like a child in the fight between snake and mongoose, the state cannot be a mere onlooker and let the struggle between the classes or conflict between the classes continue. So state has to interfere and talk about the welfare. So views of Nozick, Friedman and Hayek in 20th century, they are considered as libertarians, and they have also stood for the minimal state in 20th century after the positive or welfare function of the state has eaten into the areas where individuals found themselves bounded up and they could not feel free to pursue their imagination, their ideas. So these writers have also supported the negative liberal view of the functions of the state and have opposed social welfare oriented planning or intervention of the state in economic affairs. Now, these new champions of classical liberalism or free market liberalism have strongly criticized the welfare or regulatory function of the modern state. Nozick, he particularly writes that our main conclusion about the state are that a minimal state, that is limited to narrow functions of protection against force, against theft, against fraud or enforcement of contract and so on, is justified, that anyone or any more extensive state will violate a person's right to be forced to do certain things, that is not to be forced to do certain things, and is unjustified, and that the minimal state is aspiring as well as right. Then during the present century, the function of state has increased manifold, and those who still support the negative liberal view of the state functions are regarded as conservatives. Here, J.S. Mill says that as an intellectual articulation, the conservative mood is merely a reformulation of classical liberalism in entirely unclassical age of 20th century. So it is the image of a society in which authority is at the minimum. That is what they are aiming at, because it is guided by autonomous forces of magic market in the present century. The capitalist itself is demanding more and more welfare functions of the state in order to check the rising tide of expectation of the working class. And in this, the slogan of liberalism in the present century, that is the welfare democratic state, a powerful state which may save the capitalist class from the organization of the working class, which may crush the revolutions of the working class and save the capitalist socio-economic order. So, having talked about minimal state thus far and how it has come to have a shape in 20th century, what we finally conclude is that the argument of negative liberalism in support of minimum function of the state are economic, it is political, it's moral, and on scientific grounds. So on the economic basis, they have suggested that a free and uncontrolled economy is necessary for the free economic development of free society. Because every individual, they believe, knows their self-interest better, and on the political basis, it is suggested that increase in the function of the state will lead to increase in the power of the state and will endanger the individual's freedom. Similarly, on moral grounds, it is said that by increasing the function of the state, self-dependence and initiative of the individual will suffer, and he will become a parasite on the state, which will hinder the development of his personality. And then the scientific basis, that is the capacity to survive, must survive, that is the survival of the fittest. So this law of social Darwinism is supported, according to which only those who have the capacity to survive, they should alone survive, and the survival of the fittest is the law of nature which should be applicable to society. The state should not give support to those who otherwise are unable to survive on their own. So in brief, what we can conclude is that, as Gilchrist has summarized, Some of the main functions of state in a minimalist concept that we are discussing here, that is called negative liberalism, is the protection of the state and the individuals from foreign aggression. Now, that was something which was agreed upon by minimalist for state to have. Then protection of individuals against each other. Now, that is for physical injury or against any kind of personal restraints or slander or robbery or any kind of thuggery. So, protection of property, their own property, from damage or from being forcefully taken away. That is another work that state should do. And then protection of individuals against any fraud or false contract or breach of contract. And then the protection of handicap. Now, this is something Spencer opposed, like this should not be the sphere of activity of state in a minimal kind of an state activity. And the protection of individuals against preventable evils such as plague or malaria. I mean, state should not interfere. That is what they believed, but later on it was felt like at least the minimum should be to somehow prevent such evils or such diseases from the masses. So that was what I had for today in minimal state, and this concept was an improvement upon the negative liberalism, that was the laissez-faire kind of minimal state that was being propagated by Adam Smith in the beginning, and then Bentham later on built upon it, and Spencer also advocated in the earlier part of the classical liberal phase of the minimalist theory. And then later on in 18th century and later on in 20th century especially, the another sets of writers who continued having a faith in the minimal state, and they wanted for different reasons the minimal state to continue, and that is what we have discussed here. They had their economic reason, their own common grounds, then economic reason plus their own practical reason, scientific reason. So these reasons were given, and in 20th century further the libertarians, another set of scholars in the form of Nozick, Friedman, Hayek, I mean, these were the ones, Isaiah Berlin, these are the ones who propagated and supported a minimal state theory, and they wanted state to interfere less and less in economic sphere especially, and they had their own reasons for doing that, just to individuals to have their own freedom, to enjoy that freedom, and with that freedom the society was ultimately going to be benefited. So here with the summarization of Gilchrist, where he believes that state should only protect the individual and state from foreign aggression, and then further it should protect the individuals from clashing with each other or causing any kind of physical injury to each other. Then protection of their property, I mean, these are the rights which they carried from the state of nature, where John Locke, he feels like he says the individuals had these natural rights, right to life, right to freedom, and right to property. So these rights are to be protected after the formation of the state itself, and then the property should be protected against damage or any kind of fraud or theft, and then protection of individuals against any kind of false contract which they may enter into because of the ignorance or because of cleverness on the part of the other party, and then also the breach of contract if it is done by the individuals who are party to the contract, and then protection of handicapped to some extent, although it was denied. I mean, this action was denied by the classical liberals who talked about minimal state, but the later half, they at least gave this kind of a duty to state to protect the handicapped, and then protection of individuals against preventable evils. That was also, and still, but it was still believed that state should remain minimal kind. It should not do more than that. I mean, no welfare activities, or especially the planning on the part of state for economic development or any kind of individual development. So all plannings are to be discouraged, and all forms of subsidies and the help which government provides to those who can otherwise not survive in the free market economy. I mean, those forms of all hedgings and protections are to be avoided. So that is what minimal state came to have a shape in the 20th century. So with that, I come to the end of what I had to present. Thanks for watching. Thank you.